music.
So, money, power, respect.
Money, power, respect. That's actually the Locks featuring Little Kim.
So
I just had to. But that's in love, my friend.
Yeah. So I'm going to do it anyway. I mean, I'm going to say it anyway.
Go for
just
it.
one chorus because I think that's why we chose it.
Fearless.
Right? So we couldn't do it, so I'm going to do it.
Do what I want.
It's the key to life.
Yes.
Money, power, respect.
What you
need
in life. Absolutely. That's
Money,
right.
power, respect. When you're eating right.
Eating right.
Money, power, respect. Help you sleep at night.
Help you sleep.
You'll see the light. It's the key to life.
Yes.
Money, power, respect. What you need in life.
Respect.
Money, power, respect when you're eating right. Money, power, respect. Money, power, respect. Money, power, respect is the key to life.
Also the poet laureate of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Right. So, welcome to Cincinnati, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was. They matched They matched us up perfectly. I will tell you, we have hit it from the moment, right?
I must say yes, and I am thrilled and honored to sit up here with you and to talk with you on the phone. I'm humbled that they thought of me as someone to even be near you. In that respect, no, I mean that. Your accomplishments and your dedication, more than your accomplishments to this community, are admirable. So to even be a 20th close to that at my age,
Thank you. Let's talk about the stuff.
Yes, that's good.
Let's talk about stuff. Let's talk about stuff. So I wanted to welcome you to Cincinnati,
Thank
and
you.
I also would ask that you kind of frame our discussion about money, power, respect, and equity. So that they know kind of.
So
what
I'm
we're
tall,
talking
so I'm
about.
gonna move this a little bit. Here we go. So money, power, respect. Where that even came up for me was in this context of comparing equity to equality. And Eileen and I have this similar experience of being in rooms where people like to take the equality trajectory in conversation and thought process, and for many of us in the room, the logic modeling idea. Everybody wants to talk about equality because we get to center on feelings, we get to center on interpersonal relationships in really interesting ways, but we don't really start hitting the core of what are the mechanics around money, power,
Respect.
I'd also like to lift up that honor as another thing that we can talk about in the context of respect, dignity of the human experience, and the varying ways that our experiences are operationalized, the ways that our experiences are brought to life, right? And in terms of having impact on others. Equality doesn't make people have that conversation because it's about, well, how can we be in a similar place of experience and resonance versus how has your experience and resonance in life impacted mine? Mm-hmm. How is mine impacting yours? How have systems made the way for the experiences in my life to either create an index of opportunity or to create an index of choices? And I use air quotes on purpose because a lot of people are living through compounded experiences and realities where they're not making choices. They're doing their best to survive. So that is where we started.
Right. So the simple thing about equity is that if everybody needs shoes and you give everybody a size 10, that's equality, that's not equity. So you give people what they need. That's why equity is, for us, where we choose to focus. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit about is to describe from my view of how money, power, and respect play out in Cincinnati. So I'll give you my example. So yesterday, they asked us to take our city partners, as you've heard before, to visit a certain place. And so I took Michael to a monument to Jenny D. Porter that's in the West End. I took him to the West End because there are cranes all over the West End. And because Jenny Porter lived in the West End, and because her view of life was different than many black people's at the time that she was around. And the reason I did that is because the West End, to me, is a metaphor for what happens across Cincinnati. And it's a metaphor because every time, well, let me go back a little bit. So back in the 60s when there was what they used to call urban renewal, they ran Interstate 75 through the black community, the most vibrant black community where all the black people lived. All the lawyers lived there, all the doctors lived there, all the musicians and artists lived there, and it was right down in the West End. That was a black community. They tore out, they just raised a part. They decided to raise a part of the community to build the highway. So they raised 25,000 people out of their homes. And they went up the hill, up to Avondale. Some of them were over the Rhine. Some of them came to what I still call over the Rhine. Came to over the Rhine and to Evanston. But the bottom line is that this city chose to displace an entire portion of the black community that was settled in Cincinnati. They tore apart the culture there. They tore apart the neighborhood there. And that happened, within my lifetime. That happened in my lifetime. Same difference happening today in the West End. Once again, FC, which is the professional soccer team, decides they want to come to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati wants them, and that's fine. So where are we going to put the stadium, y'all? Well, we got two choices. We got Oakley, which is a middle to upper income neighborhood, or the West End. Well, guess what? Oakley said, y'all not coming over here. You're not coming here. We do not want the congestion. We do not want the traffic. We do not want any of that. So guess what? Guess where it went? Guess where it's going? It's going right in the West End. Again, so every time there is a major developmental decision like that, including this one we're sitting in, is always displacing black and or poor people, always. So that's kind of the history of this place. So we do a lot of good stuff here, and I'm not suggesting we don't. But our taxpayers passed 4 levies the other day. But it's our taxpayers who are doing that. They give the money, the question is how it's being used. So money, power, and including, the respect is including the people who are affected by the decision, in the decision, as leaders in the decision, is what we have not done well on a meta level. So that's how I would describe how it works here when you're talking about large-scale development.
Yeah, so in Philly, and not just in Philly, but in Philly in particular, there's this conversation around community development and whether or not it can be trauma-informed, right? I'm sure we've all heard this term a lot, right? It's a bit of a buzz term now. I like to call it a little bit of a euphemism, same way we use the terms urban, at risk, vulnerable populations, right? We know who we mean and what we're talking about when we say those things, but these are really interesting, often research designations, funding streams, again, that begin to semi-cloak who we're talking about and kind of cloud a historical understanding of what the inputs are to create that vulnerability or to have, put people at risk. I like to qualify those things. At risk of what? At risk of not graduating high school? At risk of not going to the doctor in a timely way? Like, can we be very clear about what the risks are? And so taking that approach of forcing people to enumerate the risk, forcing people to be clear about their definition of trauma, forcing people to be clear about what it means for people who have been serially displaced over and over again to then reckon with the trauma in their lives. How do they make sense of that in the concept of community development or community economic development? This is a question that's being raised in Philadelphia over and over again, and I've had the privilege and the plight of trying to make sense of that. And I say, the plight, because it's hard. Because when you respect people, when you honor their humanity and you give them the space of dignity for the fullness of their experience, that means we also make space for the fullness of the history of who they are, because being a human is an embodied experience. It is a historical experience. Time is not as linear as we would like it to be, right? We've put that construct around time, but to the body, it doesn't work that way, particularly when you're talking about like the physiology of trauma. All of that is a long way to talk about when we begin to bring people who have been impacted by a series of governmental policies and economic policies and what I like to call informal culture, which is like a workplace culture, the practices of the private sector that actually aren't that regulated often by government when it probably should be, right? It's this weird thing of like, oh, we don't like regulations. No, you do. You like regulations that work for you, right? It's not you don't like regulation. This is not a true free-form market. This is a designed market on your behalf, right? Yeah. So when you have all those forces at play, and then we're going to people like, well, what do you need? That can be the most insensitive question. And hear me, I'm not saying that I know what you need, or we should assume that we know exactly what you need, but if you're coming to a community that you've paid for a whole bunch of research on, right, and you know there's a food insecurity issue, please don't ask people if they're hungry, just show up with some food. That's a waste of time and capital. And so these are the issues that in projects we are struggling through in Philly, where I'm like, please don't go in there with another survey that asks them about those issues, because that's disingenuous. What you are demonstrating to them is that to the point of power, they have no power, right? People need to practice power, and a way for people with power to get in the space of practicing sharing power is to honor that people have legitimately put forward a request and that you heard it. You demonstrate and activate your space of power on their behalf and invite them in to participate in making their own power, because they're the only ones that can do that. But again, if I'm speaking to a room of policymakers and funders, you're gonna have to be a little more demonstrative that you've, in terms of hearing. And that's something we're working on in Philly. Again, I'm really big on do not show up asking questions that we have on record for 20 plus years and the data hasn't changed. That is foolish.
But what's important to me is that we all really understand that we have power.
Absolutely right.
That we have it. We just don't always exercise it, and sometimes we give it away. And so, but I think mostly we don't think we have it. And so I really want you young folks to understand the power that you do have, because you've got a lot of it. Everybody has access to it. So don't underestimate yourselves in that regard. There's external power, of course, and there's internal power. And the way you deal with external power is to understand your own power, then to form a collective with other people who have power, and then you can deal with external power, right? But it all goes from the inside out, y'all. So it doesn't start out there. That's why the government telling somebody to do something, well, they're not doing it. So it's really hard to tell other folks to do stuff that you're not doing. Or you can tell them, but they tend not to pay as much attention to you. So really understanding and thinking and talking about power so that you understand how to have it, how to use it, is important if you want to address some of the issues that we're talking about. Because if you don't, then the same thing continues to repeat itself over and over and over again. But you know what? I suspect this is true in Philly too. We've had some models of how power can be spread across community and decisions made across community. One of them is called the collaborative agreement. For those of you who don't know, the collaborative agreement, everybody was involved. The Black United Front was involved, the white community was involved, the police were involved, the business involved. Everybody was involved in having the discussion about the excessive use of force, because they were killing black men right and left. That's what was happening. And so in order to stop that, there needed to be a massive shift in who makes the decision about what happens, and who's got the power and the sharing of that power, or the keeping of your own power and the exercise of it. You know, and so it was a great way, I think, in the only a couple ways that I remember over the 45 years I've been here, that was one of them. And so, we weren't able to sustain it. So the question becomes, I think we are creative enough to come up with the solutions if we're talking to the people who are affected by it. The question is, how do we sustain it and not let it flip back to the way that it's been, not flip back to the status quo? And for me, that's the question that we need to be asking ourselves. How do we do that? Because the collaborative agreement is a national model. It's being used all over the United States. All over the United States it's being used, better than we're using it here. You know, and so that's the key question for me. So what experiences do you have in Philadelphia that we might look to?
Yeah, we're questioning a lot of things in Philadelphia, right? So, not trying to paint Philly with a bad light when I'm going to make these comments. Same way I'm not trying to insist that communities impacted by trauma don't have all humans have the power of choice. It's just when we use that word in a socio-political context, it's typically about assigning blame. Like you had the choice to do this and that, but you didn't do that. You did this other thing. And that's what I mean by well, wait a minute now. When we're using choice like that, right, that's funny, right? We're having, there's a term with data, having fun with numbers. When you start playing around with data to make it kind of skew to say what you want. We have fun with language, right? We shift that lexicon real quick, so that we're all using the same words, but the connotation, what we're intending and what we are meaning are not the same in the same space. And so all that being said, Philly, one of the things we're really unpacking in terms of models, the question is, how do they become more human-centered? So I heard this fantastic quote. I wish I remember this woman's name. All I can honor is that she is a woman of color. Unfortunately, I cannot remember her name. It's at a conference, and she said, trauma and grief schedule itself. It's our responsibility to schedule joy and meaningful celebration. And that struck me to my core. I wanted to jump, I wanted to run, because when I look at any model put before us, we're not honoring any of that context in the human experience when we want people to think about how do we start doing with money, the right sizing of these issues. Yeah. So for me, it's looking at, and I'm talking with a number of folks in Philadelphia about this, all transcendence and wonder are a part of the human experience as well, and they are part and parcel to the journey of invigorating and building the imaginative faculties like a muscle. And the problem with all the models that I'm working through in Philly, and I challenge a lot of people on this all the time, we can only, and this is actually quoting one of my favorite academics, John Powell, and it's a loose quote, we can only imagine but so far and in so many ways and but so high for people who we barely honor as human. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to policies and models, if I'm not even considering that part of your experience towards healing should include awe and wonder, that if I'm not thinking about your growth, and I mean normative growth, right? We all expect to grow. We do not expect the 5-year-old to stay in the same place when they're 10, right? We all just expect growth. A kid puts a seed in some dirt, puts some water on it, they expect the plant to grow, right? They actually have some patience issues at that point, right? So even in growing, how are we building spaces in our models for people to have these human-centered experiences that are on the positive affect side, a positive emotional experience side, that can help them better participate in creating the models? I don't think we have a model that works yet, is I think my long-winded answer.
Well, he does the specific, I do the meta, right? Because I need to deal with this out here, what it's doing to all of us, and all of us, But one thing that came up in my mind was that we actually have another model here that worked pretty darn well that nobody pays attention to. So I was on the school board for 8 years here. And actually, during the time I was on the school board, we spent $1.5 billion to build and renovate new schools for every single child in Cincinnati. We did it in 10 years. We did it under budget. And we did it by allowing every school site to develop their own school. So yes, we had some centralized resources for them, but the bottom line is the community where that school sat, the school and the architect actually formed a site team. They developed their own schools and decided what they wanted in them, that they wanted them green or whatever, however they wanted to do it. And we learned things from what some schools were doing, and we were able to introduce it in other schools. So, and it was the biggest public works project in Cincinnati history. And nobody even paid really attention to it. The bottom line is, it probably was one of the major spurs of neighborhood redevelopment. It was. And nobody has talked about that. So that is a way to do things equitably with a whole lot of money. And that's about what it costs, to make sure that people are included, and to make sure that people who are affected by it are included, and that there are the resources there, both the financial and the social resources, Jessica, to make sure the capital to accomplish change in our community in a way that everybody wants. So that's a kind of a really great example to me that I had not really thought of before.
It reminds me of the idea of participatory budgeting, right? Or
Yeah.
participatory grant making,
Yes.
right? Like, there are ways for us to share power amongst each other, right? What happens when you decentralize the making and decision-making process, right? What happens when, as for an example, I'll go really acute, because in a lot of youth programming, particularly in areas that are, again, at risk, urban, blah, 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 everybody wants to enumerate all the deficits. And I go, well, where are the opportunities to build on assets that are already there? And then where are the opportunities to, let's attack any weakness, right? Let's attack it with our strengths. Why are we attacking weaknesses with weaknesses? It's kind of dumb. Anyhow, that's not calling people dumb. I just think that's a waste of time and a waste of good capital, particularly financial and social capital, right? With smaller programs, if you have, say, a line item for snacks, do you really need to make the choice on the snacks? Or can you actually build a participatory decision-making body of the young people and let them curate their own snacks over the year? Let them argue about it, give them the budget, let them talk about how they want to allocate it, if they want to move things around over here. There are fascinating things that young people will discover, skills they develop through literal problem framing of practice by just doing something as simple as taking a line item that has to be spent anyway and opening up, to your point, right, this process of group decision making and letting them work through that, right? You can do the same with trips. So there are really small ways for us to practice that, even within programs where we're like, I don't have that much, to your point, power, we don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of X. It's like, actually, you still can do something, right?
Actually, you got it all. Because change happens where you are. It doesn't happen over there. It happens where you are. So that little stuff is big stuff, and we need to understand that it's big stuff. We have the ability to change what happens in this community because we care. But we do have to come together in a different way, understand our power, and use it differently. So don't give away your power. You got the power. Use it, and use it well. So there's just one last little thing that I want to read if I could, because I just thought, I don't know where I found this, but I found it and I thought it was quite wonderful. So this is a sacred time. We are not here by accident or coincidence. We have been uniquely appointed to share our gifts and talents, and the world is forever, our community is forever altered because of it. So it's y'all turn. Yours too.
Yes, ma'am.
Go do it.
Thank you.